Short answer, yes, probably. Long answer, yes, probably, because it still is a really fantastic laptop, even for editing in Davinci Resolve. I've had my little MacBook M1 Air for a little over a year now, and honestly, I've really enjoyed using it. It's actually the first ever Apple device which I've purchased myself, because I've never really had an interest in what they were doing, but the M1 Air seemed interesting. It seems to be super efficient and be able to do things that notebooks shouldn't do, which is why I went out and picked one up, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, I did pick up an M1 Pro as well upon release, not necessarily because I was unhappy with my Air, because I wasn't. It was doing 90% of what I wanted it to do, but I sort of got caught up in the hype. I wanted to see what all the fuss was about with the new ones, so I did pick one up. Now, I've used both of them for a little while, and if I'm completely honest, I actually think the M1 Air is the better choice for most people, or at least 80 or 90% of people. It really depends on what you're doing in Davinci Resolve, but I think most people would be happy sticking with the M1 Air rather than paying considerably more money to pick up the M1 Pro. So what model is my MacBook Air? Well, I actually went for the 512GB version. That's with 8GB of RAM, or unified memory as they call it. So that means it's got the 8-core CPU and the 8-core GPU, and it cost me £1,249 brand new, and that's actually still what it's listed for on the Apple Store. And yes, I did say 8GB. There's just 8GB of RAM or unified memory in my laptop, and it's done fine. Honestly, 8GB of RAM in a Windows machine just isn't enough really for editing, especially doing any sort of 4K stuff in Davinci Resolve. But I've been really impressed with how the MacBook Air handles that little amount of RAM. Now, to give you an idea of what I'm comparing it to, it's this one here. I've actually made a video on this. If you want to see a more in-depth review sort of test of the Pro model, I have done a video that's linked up there. But this is my MacBook M1 Pro with the Pro processor. Always a mouthful. It's the 1TB model that comes with 16GB of RAM and a 10-core CPU with 16-core GPU. And it cost me a grand total of £2,399, which is a lot of money. Or in other terms, it's pretty much bang on twice the price of the M1 MacBook Air, which I purchased last year. But it is twice the laptop. As spec'd at twice the price, you get twice the RAM. 8GB versus 16GB. I've got twice the storage. I also checked the speed of those drives, and the 1TB drive is twice as fast in terms of both read and write speeds. We've got twice the number of GPU cores. We've got more than twice the number of ports. And I can go on. The internal display is only just a little bit bigger. You've got 12 versus 14 inches, but the Pro one is twice as bright. You've got 400 nits on the Air versus 1000 nits on the Pro. The refresh rate, as you've probably guessed, is also twice as high. You've got 60 Hz on the Air, whereas you've got up to 120 Hz on the Pro model. Even the speakers, in my opinion, are about twice as good. The M1 Air speakers are actually really good for the type of device, for such a small, thin device, but the speakers on the M1 Pro are probably just about the best speakers I've heard on any sort of portable device. It even technically charges twice as fast, because the M1 Air comes with just a 30-watt charger, while the Pro model comes with a 96-watt charger. That's not to say that the battery is twice as big though. The Air comes with a 50-watt-hour battery versus the 70-watt-hour battery on the Pro. However, the Pro is more powerful, so it does use a little bit more power. In terms of battery consumption, I found them to be very, very comparable. They're very similar. I wouldn't give a win to either. Both are really, really outstandingly good when it comes to battery life. So it is one of those rare occurrences where you pay twice as much, but you do literally get twice as much for your money. But, and it's a big fat juicy but, do you really need it? And that's the question. That's the question you should be asking yourself, because the Air is still a really surprisingly capable laptop. I'm going to jump into Davinci Resolve in a moment and show you a quick demonstration of one of my genuine projects that I do, skip around to show you how it performs in there. But before I do, I just want to talk about One other thing, one other area that the Air actually comes out with a bit of a win over the Pro, and that's form factor. The Air, with its design, with its sort of chamfered edges, it just feels smaller. It feels more portable. It's a little bit lighter on the lap. It slides into bags just that little bit easier, and it doesn't have any of the weird sharp edges which the Pro has. Seriously, this bit here is weirdly sharp. It has no reason to be that sharp, and it's quite uncomfortable when you catch your wrists on it. Plus, there's no notch on the Air. Now, I have got used to the notch. I've used the black wallpaper to hide it, but every now and again, I'll sort of lose my mouse under it or go looking for something in the taskbar, and it's shifted over to the right, and honestly, it just kind of upsets me. I don't really like it. I actually gave my Pro to a child the other day, and he saw the notch, and he just burst into tears. Okay, that's not actually true, but I can imagine it happening. Plus, on top of that, the Air is, of course, fanless. Kind of weird that it's called the Air and it doesn't actually do anything with air, but there you go. The Air is fanless, and this in itself is a bit of a pro and also a bit of a con. It's a pro because no fans means no noise. It's silent all of the time. You don't hear anything kick in, even when it gets hot. But on the flip side to that, it does get hot. It can get really hot. After long amounts of rendering, the bottom is really, really warm to the touch, and eventually it will start to thermal throttle, which will reduce the performance. However, you do really need to have it sitting at 100% for quite a long time. I'm meaning like 30, 40, 50 minutes before it really starts to feel hot and then probably starts to thermal throttle from there. Sort of 10, 15, 20 minute renders, it won't thermal throttle whatsoever. So yes, it might be half the laptop that the Pro is in many, many ways. But it does have some minor advantages over the Pro. But the main thing for me, and I think for you, is even though it's half the laptop, it's still likely to be good enough. As long as it's good enough, ignore the hype, ignore the fear of missing out, as it's called, the MacBook M1 Air is probably good enough for most casual editors. Now let me prove it to you. I'm going to open up Davinci Resolve and we'll take a quick look. Now I'm going to run the first half of this on Davinci Resolve Studio. I will give you a quick demonstration of the free version as well later on in the video. I'm capturing the footage using a capture card, so none of the performance will actually be hindered because I'm using any software or anything like that. So let's open it up and take a look. Now I'm going to use this project. This is my studio tour video. I've linked it down in the description, or you can click on the card that's on the screen now so you can actually see the project for yourself if you want to. Now this is quite a long project. It's 20 minutes long in total, just under. It's like 19 and a bit, and there's loads of stuff going on here. Now I'm just going to open up my media pool. You can see I'm on this tutorial timeline. I'm just going to open the settings for that one and show you that it is Ultra HD or 4K 3840 by 2160. Now let's just close the media pool. I'm going to go to my playback. I'm not using optimized media or proxy. Timeline proxy mode is off and my render cache is none. I'm going to delete my render cache just to get rid of everything, so you can see it's all happening in real time. Now this project is actually a bit of a mess. The timeline's a bit of a mess. I messed up some of the exposure, so I had to use some adjustment clips to bring the exposure down. So it's actually a really good sort of real life example, which we're just going to whip through, and I'm going to show you the performance of this M1 Air. Now all the footage on the timeline, let me just click on this random one here. We'll go to the inspector file. All of the footage is H.264 422 10-bit Ultra HD footage from a Panasonic Lumix S5. So there's no sort of Blackmagic RAW, which is a little bit easier. This is H.264. There's actually some H.265 footage in here as well, if I can just find some. This is H.265 10-bit 420, I believe, also in Ultra HD, and that's been slowed down to run at 25 frames per second, so we actually get that in slow motion. Now everything's graded, so let me just show you that real quick. We're going to jump into the color tab. This is my same sort of color correction that I always do on these videos. We've just got a real simple LUT just to bring it to Rec 709. Then we've got some basic color wheel adjustments and some sharpening. So nothing fancy, but this is, again, real life. This is what I do for the majority of my projects. So now we're just going to hop onto the edit tab. And all we're going to do, first of all, is just jump about. I can just trim through the timeline. It doesn't skip a beat. It has no problems whatsoever. We can just skip through. Let's pick a point here. We'll hit play. And it's just going to play back in real time. This is 4K or Ultra HD timeline with Ultra HD footage, no proxies, and it's happy as Larry. We'll skip over here and that'll play. We'll go over here and that'll play. Over here. The intro has some quicker sort of jumps, edits, which sometimes can trip things up. But that's just going to play through. with no issues whatsoever. So you can see it's pretty comfortable at doing this sort of thing, this base level editing. It really doesn't skip a beat at all. Now I'm just going to zoom into this B-roll here. So this B-roll, I haven't actually compressed or flattened this at all. So this footage is playing over the top of this one here. So we're just going to go to video. We're going to zoom this out so we can see both. So they're actually playing on top of each other. So we've got two streams of 4K. We'll hit play. And that's not dropping a single frame. It's playing both streams of 4K. That's color corrected on this 4K timeline without any issues. Let's grab this one. We're just going to drag this one above here for now. We'll lengthen that one out. It's not graded, but that's no issues. Let's just zoom that out. Move this over here. So now we've got three streams of 4K. We'll hit play. And again, it's still not dropping a single frame. It's playing all three back, 25 frames per second, two of which are colored. Let's just click on this one. We're going to go to the dynamic zoom, toggle that on, hit play, see what that does. Still absolutely fine. Let's go to this one. We'll put dynamic zoom on here as well. We'll hit play. That's absolutely fine. Let's go to effects and let's just drop a diamond transition on that one for whatever reason. We'll hit play. And it's absolutely fine. We'll do a quick cut on this one. Delete that section. So as you can see, for that sort of thing, an Ultra HD 4K timeline with 4K footage, it's quick as anything. Honestly, you can just skip around, you can cut, you can make all your amendments, and there's no problems at all. Even with 3 layers, 3 streams of 4K, without any proxies, it's playing it back absolutely fine. Now, where it starts to stumble or slow down is when you start to do some more complicated things with Fusion, some things which rely a little bit heavily on using the CPU and the GPU. So let me just show you some of those titles, and then I'll show you how you can get around it using a device like this. So we're going to skip over to this title here. Now, it's not a massively complicated title, but if we hit play, you can see we are dropping frames. It's just looking a little bit skippy. It's found itself, and then it's been all right. So that's still not too bad. You can see it skip frames at the beginning, and then it sort of finds its flow. Let's find another one. Skips a few frames, sort of figures itself out, and then it's fine. So you do notice that when you're using any sort of Fusion title. These aren't the most complicated, but we are dropping frames. Now, the same thing can be said for transitions. So a lot of these standard ones, things like your iris and your motion, they'll be absolutely fine. It's when you start to use the Fusion transitions. So let me just grab circles, and we'll drop this one on here, and we'll hit play. And you can see it's dropped frames, and it's just sort of struggling to keep up. Now, if we just do one more example, let's use one of my old spin transitions. We'll hit play. And again, it's just struggling to keep up a little bit. Now, this is 4K on 4K, which on this laptop, using the inbuilt monitor, makes absolutely no sense because this isn't even a 4K display or an Ultra HD display. It's 2560 by 1600, which is more of like a 2K display. With the preview window sat in the middle of the screen, realistically, you're only seeing that at maximum 1080p sort of proportionally on your device. I've actually made a video where I discuss why I never edit in 4K, which you can click on up here or down in the description. So what I would do in this instance is either lower my timeline resolution to 1080p just while I edit it, or I'd use the timeline proxy mode, which is what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to go playback, timeline proxy, and I'm just going to turn this to half resolution, which is about 2K. Now, the actual preview window, you'll barely notice a difference because we can't see 4K anyway, so the difference between 4K and 2K on this monitor is negligible at best. And we're just going to go back. Let's find a title for starters, this one over here. And as you can see, it will now play this back in full 25 frames per second without dropping a frame. We'll go over try this one, and it'll do exactly the same thing. Now we'll go back to it and edit point, and this time we'll drop the drop warp on here again, and we'll hit play. And as you can see, I'll have no issues with that. Let's grab the same spin transition. We'll drop it over on this one over here, and we'll hit play. And I'll have no issues with that either. Now the same thing can be said for noise reduction. So I'm going to give this a click. We're going to hop into the color page. We're just going to make sure that we're on this specific clip here. And then we're just going to go to noise reduction. We'll add 1 frame. We'll just go up to about 20-ish, and we'll hit play. And after the transition's finished, it will play this back with and temporal noise reduction with 1 frame at 25 frames per second. Now let's just do the same thing. We'll go up to 3 and we'll hit play. And it will start to skip a few frames. We're only getting 20 here. And then if we go to 5, we can play it back, but we're only getting about 15 frames. But what about rendering? I'm just going to go to the Deliver tab, and I've actually rendered this project out already. I've tried it twice just to make sure, and it renders this entire project with all the Fusion titles, the color correction at H.265 MP4 at Ultra HD, and it takes just 13 minutes. There was 13 minutes 30 and then 13 minutes 27. Remember, this is a 20-minute project, so overall, that's not too bad at all. Now, I actually monitored the battery life as well, and it used just 9% battery to do that render. So if we do the maths, you can actually have one of these Airs sitting maxed out 100% rendering, and it'll actually render for about 2.5 hours, which is quite a lot when you think that it's sitting at 100%. Or to put it another way, 20-minute video, 9%, you could render out a 4K video that's almost 4 hours in length on just a single charge. You could render Martin Scorsese's 3.5-hour epic, The Irishman, in 4K on a MacBook Air on a single charge and still have a little bit of juice left over. That's a notebook without a fan. That's kind of mad. Now, obviously, when you're editing, when you're actually doing the editing itself, you're very rarely sitting at that 100%. So realistically, you can double that battery life. Anywhere between 4 to 6 hours of actual editing has been my experience, and that's pretty much what you can expect. Obviously, it will vary on the formats, on the resolution, on how many effects, how many Fusion things you're using, but 4 to 6 hours is a pretty good ballpark. But what about the free version? Well, I've actually just reverted my MacBook back to the free version of Davinci Resolve, and I'll show you exactly how that looks as well. We're in the exact same project. Everything was the same as before, but I've set the timeline proxy mode to off once again. And again, we can just skip through. Overall, the performance is very, very similar. I can just pick a point, hit play, and I will get the 25 frames per second. Same timeline, same resolution, same everything, basically, except obviously for the noise reduction. But we can skip around. It's still a very, very capable machine. Even on the free version of Davinci Resolve, we can skip through, and it is happy. Let's find one of the titles. We'll hit play. And again, it's going to skip frames. It looks very similar to as it did before. So let's go to playback, timeline proxy, half resolution, zoom in a bit. We'll hit play once again. And that's going to fix all of the issues for us. And that's going to give us the full 25 frames per second. What about the multiple tracks? Well, if we just find that point in the timeline once again and hit play, again, no issues. We've got the little transition. We've got the dynamic zooms on. We've got the 3 streams of 4K, and it's having no issues whatsoever. It really is a perfectly capable little laptop, especially if you're looking for something to edit on the go. The form factor is great, the battery life is really, really good, and the performance is way better than you'd think possible from a fanless little notebook. Is it good enough for you? Well, only you will know that. But if what you do is very similar to what you've seen in this video, I think you'll be surprised at how good the M1 Air really is. If that doesn't fit your needs, if you need a bit more than I've shown you, then obviously you will need to pay a bit more and go for something a little bit more powerful. Now, if you are interested in the Air, but you think you want maybe a bigger hard drive, 1 terabyte, or you want to go for that 16 gigabytes of RAM rather than the 8 gig, then things do start to get a little bit more complicated because the prices start to jump up really quite quickly. If you were to take the Air up to 1 terabyte of storage and then 16 gigabytes of RAM, you're looking at about £1,649, which is getting remarkably close to the base Pro model. Now that comes with 512 gigabytes of storage and the same 16 gigabytes of RAM, but of course you get a better screen, you get all the additional ports, you get the better speakers, all that sort of stuff for just £300 more. I personally think the Air, the 512 gigabyte of storage, and if you can find it, the 16 gigabytes of RAM is probably the sweet spot, especially if you can find one used for about that £1,100 sort of mark, then that starts to make sense. But as I said at the beginning, don't be put off by the 8 gigabytes, especially if you do less than what I've shown you in this video. You will really be surprised at how much you can actually do with just 8 gigabytes of RAM on these devices. Just to make the point, I'm actually going to edit this entire video on my MacBook Air. I'm not going to use my PC, not going to use my Pro, I'm going to do it all on the Air. and it's going to be edited at a higher than Ultra HD resolution. I'm going to be using a Cinema 4K resolution for this one. I'm actually going to put the render time down in the pinned comment below, so if you're interested in that, go and check it out. Anyway, I hope this video was useful. If it was, give me a thumbs up. Any thoughts or feelings down in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. Take it easy. I'll catch you next time.